So let's get back. This is video two where we're talking about chapter 10, Inequalities of Gender. So we were just talking about the baby study. So we also must remember that I'm just a reminder with this clock that's on the screen that gender definitions change with time. So cultural definitions of gender roles can also change. In the book American Manhood, Anthony Rotudo identifies three distinct culturally created conceptions of manhood. These definitions and redefinitions of gender roles developed in North American middle class prior to the 20th century. The first phase, which is the communal manhood, was prominent in society of the New England. During this period, the definition of manhood was embedded in one of the obligations to the community. A man's social class at birth gave him his place in the community, and he fulfilled himself through public usefulness more than through economic success. The second phase, the self-made manhood, became the dominant male gender definition in the first decades of the 19th century. A societal identity based on personal achievement replaced the significance of social status at birth. A man's work role became his source of male identity. Male passions were allowed to be more fullness of expression. In the late 19th century, there came another shift. The third phase of the passionate manhood emphasized not just achievement, but ambition, combativeness, and aggression. So the study done by this person is looking how the idea of manhood and what it means to be a man has shifted over time. It's almost that gender is becoming performative, meaning it's an expression that we do. What it means to be a man and acting manly. What it means to be a woman and acting like a woman. I remember a phrase when I was growing up, my mother would say, that doesn't look very ladylike. Well, I want you to watch a video. I'm going to start it here, but we're not going to watch the whole thing. It's talking about this gender as a performance and how it can be performative. Okay, so let's move along and talk about gender and the three sociological perspectives. Those perspectives, they always come back to haunt us every single chapter. So, first, we're going to talk about functionalism. Functionalism really looks at the division of labor and the divisions of work between men and women. So, you may have heard the phrase of that's women's work or that's man's work. That's something that a man does. Well, what is the function of that? Why has it survived? Well, Functionalists argue that this has survived over time because it was important to human living. It was important to our existence. Um, Early humans found that sex-based division of labor was efficient. Men, because of their size, their muscle strength, were hunters and gatherers and defenders. And men were also expendable. Men weren't as important to procreation as women were because women were the ones that were carrying a baby. One man can impregnate many women, so men were kind of expendable. Women, they provided domestic and childcare tasks because it was safer, and women were needed to make more children. So again, we're talking about very primitive societies, long time ago things is what we're talking about. But remember, functionalism is all about balance and things remaining stable. So it was important for the society to keep it going that the work was divided based upon what the role of the man and the woman was to the society. Functionalists also say that if a pattern of behavior does not benefit society, it will eventually cease to be important. So these distinctions between men's work and women's work, as in primitive societies, isn't as useful anymore. Men can certainly do work that was typically thought to be as women's work, such as taking care of the house, doing housekeeping, being a nurse, being a school teacher, things like that. And work that was traditionally thought of to be men's work, such as how about being in the military, um, working with their hands, being a construction worker, those are things. So since these distinctions are going away, it's no longer needed anymore because we're not so concerned about safety and having future generations. So conflict theory, remember, is always continually looking at inequality. Men and women do not have equal access to the resources and skills needed for success outside of the home. So there still is a gap in our society, a gap across the world about the income that men and women bring in. Work that is typically thought of as being women's work is typically paid less than work considered men's work. Their professions of men are just more highly valued. Think of lawyers, engineers, doctors. Work that's typically thought of as women's work isn't paid as much. Think of daycare workers. Think of nurses, which nurses are paid pretty good. But again, when we're comparing that to doctors, there's still a gap there. And things such as sexual harassment and abuse are used as a tool by men to keep superiority. Now, this is not something that all men do, but there are men out there. It's been well documented that in male-dominated professions, that sexual harassment or pressure is being applied to women to help keep that superiority or keep them feeling lesser than. So conflict theorists argue that this division of labor between men and women is inappropriate for modern times in which equality should be what we strive for. And finally, symbolic interactionism and interactionism is that process through which we take on gender in our lives. So gender is ingrained in, becomes incorporated into the self-concept. That's where girls learn what it means to be a girl and boys learn what it means to be a boy, and that becomes ingrained into our self-concept. So taking on these roles and getting feedback from others, that's where you hear little girls say, you need to act like a girl, you need to sit like a girl, you need to be more ladylike, or when little boys cry and they are shamed and taught that boys don't act that way. And this process even begins before birth. So the photo they have on the slide is for one of those gender reveal parties, okay? So think about whenever a family is getting ready to have a new baby, welcome a new baby into the home. Usually one of the first things people ask is, well, one, when are you due? And then two, do you know if it's a boy or girl? And if it is a girl, that's when they start acquiring the pink and the purple and the dresses and the tutus. And there's this expectation of what a girl is supposed to act like and look like once it's born. If it's a boy, they'll be maybe have a nursery that's filled with sports things. They'll be wearing blue and green, and they're supposed to be playing with trucks and things like that. Again, those expectations that are even being set before birth. If you really want to shake things up, you can do like I do whenever I had kids, and I decided not to find out what I was going to have. People couldn't believe it. They said things like, well, how are you going to prepare for the birth of your baby if you don't know what it is? Well, I'm pretty sure that when the baby is born, the thing it's mostly concerned about is eating, and you make sure it sleeps and you make sure it has a clean diaper. You don't need to know if it's a boy or a girl in order to do those things. So let's talk a little bit more about stereotypes and roles. So what is a sex stereotype? Get to my notes here. So we're talking here mostly about sex stereotypes and gender roles, okay? So a sex stereotype is a set of ideas based upon distortion, exaggeration, and oversimplification that's applied to a sex. It's used to portray one sex as innately superior to other. So it's those expectations between what it is for a man and a woman. If you want to turn to page 284 in your book, so a sex stereotype, men in American society are expected to be virile, brave, sexually aggressive, unemotional, logical, rational, mechanical, practical, dominating, independent, aggressive, competent, and competitive. Women are expected to be the opposite: weak, fearful, sexually passive, emotional, insecure, sentimental, arty, dependent, submissive, modest, shy, and uncompetitive. So think about just those terms that we're using when we talk about what it is to be masculine and what it is to be feminine. Some of them are thought of to be more on negative terms when we're talking about our society. We value in America people being brave, rational, practical, logical. We don't value so much when people are emotional, sentimental, dependent, submissive, shy. Those are the expectations that we are set up. And those are examples of sex stereotypes. Okay, so what are those expectations of being a man versus being a woman? What about gender roles? Well, gender roles are the culturally based sex expectations associated with each sex. Gender roles are ideal types. When I say ideal types, that means that these are perfect types, but not everybody strictly adheres to them. They're on that continuum of how feminine you are. Are you this amount of feminine, or are you this? And what it means to be masculine. There's different, again, they fall on a spectrum. So some people are very masculine and some of them are not, okay? But that sets up a conversation between role conflict and role strain. Remember, role conflict is when those expectations that fall under a status are in conflict with one another. So if we're talking about women, okay, they're supposed to be the caretaker of the family. They're supposed to watch children, okay? And in today's society, they're also supposed to go to work and help provide for the family. But how are you supposed to be the caretaker for children when you're also expected to bring home a paycheck? Okay? Think about those things. Okay? Now, when we're talking about men, men are feeling this role conflict as well. They're supposed to be the breadwinner of the family. They're supposed to be strong, confident, aggressive. But yet, now there's an expectation that men, when they go home to their wives, they're all supposed to be loving, caring, and be a father and soft and compassionate with their children. We get the same thing with role strain. That's when um, expectations of two different statuses put strain on the individual. So the work of, like I mentioned, the expectations for someone who's a worker, a woman working outside the home, and then the expectations of being a mother. Since we've had this progress, it's causing great strain on individuals.